Bui bui kala bui tokemune amsegula bui 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 kala bui beshalom ateret bala Gambarina uvdasaula Tokemune amsegula Boi beshalom boi Tokemune amsegula boi kala Tokemune amsegula boi kala. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. So glad. Welcome to Hebrew Perspectives. So glad you are here with me. Thank you for those of you that come on a regular basis and come in and share with us on what we do. We share just as the Messiah and his disciples did, and many other people. We follow the same pattern that they did, reading the same readings and learning and growing and talking and getting the Hebrew perspective. That's why we are called Hebrew Perspectives. And this week's Torah portion is called Vayechi, which means he lived. And we are in Genesis. It starts in Genesis chapter 47 and verse number 28. And it starts with Jacob lived. But before we do all that, we will before you get to liking and sharing and commenting and subscribing, we're going to say the Torah blessing as we always do. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments and has commanded us to immerse ourselves in the words of Torah. Please, Lord our God, sweeten the words of Torah in our mouth and in the mouth of your people, the family of Israel. May we and our offspring and the offspring of your people, the house of Israel, all of us, know your name and study your Torah for its own sake. Blessed are you, Lord, who teaches Torah to his people Israel. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who selected us from all the peoples and gave us his Torah. Blessed are you, Lord, giver of the Torah. And may these Torah words be sweet to you. Hallelujah. Now, it's not uncommon to say blessings throughout the day. Matter of fact, Jewish people, at the minimum, say 100 blessings a day, at least. And there's so many things that you can find that's a blessing, from when you first wake up. Thank you, Lord, for waking me up. Thank you for returning your soul to my body, giving me the opportunity to serve you. And so blessings are all over the place. We have the blessing of wonderful cold weather and snow. And that's another thing that's interesting, is that we tend to gravitate toward the negative. And then again, we're always wanting to be, we have people that are wanting to be super positive. But somewhere in the middle, somewhere in the balance of life, we understand that the bad things that happen equal out to the good things that happen. You've heard me say this before. There's a few Psalms in the book of Psalms that are actually attributed to Moses. And one of those is Moses praying and asking God for every bad day, Lord, give me a good day. Right. Yeah. And so it all evens out in the end, because God is a God of weights and measures. And he's looking for us to follow his judgments and statutes and commandments and know and learn and understand from him. And so this Torah portion, the Vayechi, he lived, there's quite a bit of blessing going on, blessing of grandchildren, blessing of children. And this is also the last Torah portion. It's the last Torah portion uh, of the book of Genesis, of the book Bereshit, in the beginning. Yeah, it wasn't that long ago that we were Bereshit, that we were in the beginning. And many wonderful things have happened, and the things that we've learned. And uh, overall, we look at it and we can see that there was a lot of things that happened. Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, Cain killing Abel, sibling rivalry. And we see this sibling rivalry all throughout the stories. It happens with Jacob and Esau. It happens with Isaac and Ishmael. It happens with Joseph and his brothers, which we have been learning quite a bit of. The book of Genesis is about Joseph. And there's a good reason why it is because it is an allusion to the Messiah. Now, one of the things that I want to point out is, yes, a good large portion of the book of Genesis is about Joseph. And what a lot of people don't understand is that we really wouldn't, if we didn't know, if we weren't taught, somehow it didn't come through culture and through history and through the Jewish people that these allusions are of the Messiah, we wouldn't really know anything about a Messiah. Okay. See, what we look at the books, we read the Gospels and we read the story of the Messiah and everything, and then we start going, we read that, and then we start going back there, then we can go back and then we see those allusions. Mm-hmm. But for a people that were back then, they didn't have these books. Mm-hmm. Now they had the writings of old. They had the Torah. They had the Psalms and Proverbs, and they had the books of the prophets. And so, and those allusions were there, and they would talk about them in rabbinic writings. Last week we talked a little bit about how there are two messiahs. They're really not two messiahs, but the concept of two messiahs is that when you read through rabbinic literature, you'll see that there is a suffering Messiah, the first coming, and there is a conquering Messiah, the one who brings peace and gathers all the tribes. That is Messiah ben David. So you have Messiah ben Joseph and Messiah ben David. So then when you go back again and read the Gospels, then you see when John was in prison and he sent message to the Messiah, and this is my opinion, but I really believe it's really strongly. I don't believe that John was really in doubt as to whether or not his cousin was the Messiah. I think at that point he may have had a little bit of a loss of faith because of where he was. That's normal. We saw that in the story of Joseph. He lost a little bit of faith and he learned from his lesson. So John sends word to his cousin, are you the Messiah? What he was really asking was, are you Messiah ben Joseph or are you Messiah ben David? Now, if I was lacking in a little bit of faith, I'd be wanting Messiah ben David, because at the time, when Messiah ben Joseph, yes, it brings about a redemption and things like that, but not complete atonement, not complete. So he may have doubted a little bit, but again, this is my opinion, but it seems very strong to me. It looks like something that's very possible. And I've talked about this over the years, and the more and more I study Torah, the more and more I see it and realize that that's a pretty good possibility. And so what we have going on here is the point of all this, of what I was just saying, is that many people, you mention Talmud, you mention oral Torah. A lot of people don't even know what oral Torah means. They just hear the word Talmud and they freak. And that's with good understanding, because they've been bombarded with lies for so many years that the Talmud is a bad thing. Are there some disparaging words said at Jesus? Sure, there are in the Talmud. You can find them. Anybody, you dig long enough, you can find something to prove, to help you to what somebody has already given you, a preconceived lie as to, a misconception, and you can sit there and build upon that. But the point is is that without these writings,
Right.
you wouldn't even know that there was a first coming and a second coming. See, we read the Gospels and we read the letters of Paul and John and James and Peter and we look at those things. You have to remember that these were written much longer after, a long time. So a lot of things were done orally. And that's why I'm talking like this, because it was an oral Torah.
That's right.
Oral things orally can be passed down for tens of thousands of years. All right. I can tell my children stories right now. I can give a key word to my children, and they will know exactly what story I'm talking about. And they can give you the details of that story. And they love that story. It's usually a funny story. They love that story. And then they even want to hear it from the source. They want me to tell the story again.
Right.
That is the power of oral transmission.
That's right.
Oral transmission, really, if you think about it, it's a whole lot stronger than the written that we have. All right. I can write my stories down, but when you hear things orally, and that's why, it's through the foolishness of preaching.
Right.
But I never quite understood why it's called foolishness. But
Right.
but when it comes down to it, it's the best way.
Yeah.
And now then, what people do with it from there, that's up to them. That's the whole free will, free choice, all of that. So again, we've got some things happening here where we have all this history. And one of the conclusions that I came up with when I was looking this over was I was looking at Rabbi Sachs' book, I believe. I've shown this one to you before. And he talks, and then toward the end, he titles this portion he talks about it being about family, faith, and freedom. And before I get too deep into it, there's one interesting thing about what's going on here is that sometimes God tells us something that is going to happen to us. Mostly I'm talking about Bible figures. Remember when God told Abraham that basically your descendants are going to go down to Egypt and be in slavery? What kind of blessing is that? Well, yes, it is a blessing, because you're going to go down there and you're going to be tried and tested, and you're going to come out stronger than you've ever been.
Right.
So here's one thing that a lot of people don't realize. When Jacob and the rest of them, they all joined Joseph in Egypt, and Joseph gave them the land of Goshen. And you may remember, we taught about how the gematria of Goshen is the same as the gematria of the word Mashiach or Messiah. So they were given salvation, so to speak. And I just love that kind of stuff. And then, that comes from Jewish literature. Okay. You understand that's another one of these reasons why we look at this stuff and why we study and we understand and we learn, where we learn and understand. There's some good stuff coming up in the book of Exodus when we get started on that next week. But so what we have happening here is that they get to the land and they buy land and they live there, and they eventually, as many people do when they get into new surroundings, and they sit back and they relax and they become what's that word? It starts with the C. I'm trying to think of complacent.
Mhm.
And they're just living their lives day to day. It doesn't mean that they still didn't know about God or things of the God, but according to rabbinic writings, they basically, what happened was that they assimilated to the culture.
Right.
They started doing Egyptian things, following Egyptian gods. It happens. People fall into this all the time. And then here's another interesting thing about it is that they're in Egypt, and yes, they do become enslaved, and we'll start reading about that next week. But you have to understand is that they could have left at any point. but they moved to that place, and it was for a purpose. It was part of it's to fulfill prophecy, yes. It's to fulfill God's plan, and they're going to go through some testing and trying. But like I said, there was no fences keeping them there. There was no bars keeping there. They chose willingly to stay there and to subject themselves to their own sin and to their own problems. Many of the problems that we face today are things that we've put upon ourselves.
True.
And does that mean God's not going to deliver us? That's not always true. God may have pushed us into that place. That's the funny thing about the decisions that we make, and even the rabbis talk about this. Is sometimes we have this a little bit of what you would call temporary insanity, and I can totally believe it. In the position that I've worked in over the years, where I've had certain employees, and we sit down in an investigation as to what happened, and talking it through, and hearing testimony, you come to the conclusion of, are you out of your mind?
Right.
Why would you do that?
Right.
Somebody breaking a rule and then getting caught and then breaking the same rule again. It's like some kind of hesed da'at, some kind of removal of the mind. Something just happened there, and the rabbis even call it. They even say that's a little bit of a spirit that takes people over and causes them to do that. So you see that, and then everything comes from God. Not a lot of people like to hear that everything comes from God. They don't, it's good and bad, but you have to remember, it's how we look at it. Yes, bad things happen to us, but and you've learned over the past few things that we've been talking about, and bringing this out here and there, is that God can turn that bad to good. And that's great. So Rabbi Sachs, in this section, he talks about family and faith and freedom. And he he talks about how, if you look carefully at this book and how it ends and everything that happens, the first thing that happens in here is that there's a blessing that happens where Jacob and his son Joseph, and Jacob was 147 years. And now it says that it's a funny thing about the Bible is that they chronologically they tell you stories, and it's like they're giving you an ending, but then he continues to live on a little while after that. It's weird chronology that happens in the Bible. So it says he calls him because it was time for him. The time approached for Israel to die. This didn't mean that Joseph, that they had this interaction and then he died. No, he actually lived 17 years in Egypt. And he says, and Joseph called for his son Joseph, and he said, please, if I have found favor in your eyes, please place your hand under my thigh and do kindness and truth with me. Please do not bury me in Egypt, for I will lie down with my fathers, and you shall transport me out of Egypt and bury me in their tomb. He said, I personally will do as you have said. He replied, swear to me. And he swore to him. Then Israel prostrated himself toward the head of the bed. Now, I won't get into this. There's a lot of mystery of all this stuff, a lot of rabbinical content. But basically, I'm just trying to give you a little bit of a summary of what's going on here. And so basically, Jacob doesn't want to be buried there. And you can kind of understand that. He still has that promise in mind, that he was promised that, and he wanted to be buried where his father and his grandfather were buried, which only makes sense. Then we jump to chapter 48, and this is how we know that Jacob is still alive, because all of a sudden now he's going to bless his grandsons. And it came to pass after these things that someone said to Joseph, behold, your father is ill. So he took his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, with him. So again, the chronology of these stories, sometimes you wonder, that it was Moses that spent so much time with God, 40 days and 40 nights without water. What a spiritual experience that would have to have been, right? Getting all these words down and writing them all down. And there's a reason why these things are written the way they are. So he took his 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, with him. And Jacob was told, behold, your son Joseph has come to you. So Israel exerted himself and sat up on the bed. And Jacob said to Joseph, El Shaddai had appeared to me in Luz, in the land of Canaan, and he blessed me. Oh, look there, another blessing. Amazing how many blessings are happening here. And why are these blessings happening? That's because God gave a command and they followed through on that command. Simple, isn't it? Doesn't it seem logical that if I follow a commandment, I'm going to be blessed? Doesn't it? I mean, he said to me, behold, I will make you fruitful and numerous. I will make you a congregation of nations, and I will give this land to your offspring after you as an eternal possession. So, a congregation of nations. Now, in the Hebrew, when we think of nations, we think of the rest of the nations and the goyim, the Gentiles, that everyone will eventually come into the covenant. That when Messiah ben David comes, the nations will be part of what is happening. They will be integrated in, grafted in, and they will be part of this, of all this possession. And that's why we say next year in Jerusalem.
That's right.
And now your 2 sons who were born to you in the land of Egypt, before my coming to you in Egypt, shall be mine. Now, whoa, here, this is interesting. He's saying they shall be mine. And it's amazing because this is something that hasn't up to this point, nothing like this has happened. We haven't had this grandfather, grandchildren action happening. And so this is something new. And this is kind of uncharted territory. This is something that makes you sit up and take notice and wonder what's going on, what's going to happen with this, what direction is this going? Let's see here, where was I? Oh, shall be mine like Reuben and Simeon, but progeny born to you after them shall be yours. They will be included under the name of their brothers with regard to their inheritance. So what Jacob just has done is made them tribes. And many people have, many Gentiles will tell you that they are of the tribe of Ephraim, and that the Ephraim is one of the 10 lost tribes. But that's really not accurate. And I don't have time to go into that here, but basically it's the reason why people are called Jews is because they're in that Judah has the scepter until Shiloh come, until Shiloh come. And so, and that's the line of the Messiah, and the Messiah is what? King of the Jews. Okay, so you understand that's why, yes, they are Israelites. They become known as Hebrews. You understand that a lot of things, the descriptions of people come from the outside in. You know, they perceived that they were unlearned. Okay, the perception's coming from somewhere else. And so we have to remember those things when we're reading and we're having to understand. And this is why we discuss these things. But as for me, when I came from Padan, Rachel died on me in the land of Canaan on the road, while there was still a stretch of land to go to Ephrath. And I buried her there on the road to Ephrath, which is Bethlehem. Then Israel saw Joseph's sons, and he said, who are these? And Joseph said to his father, they are my sons whom God has given me here. He said, bring them to me, if you please, and I will bless them. Now Israel's eyes were heavy with age. He could not see, so he brought them near him, and he kissed them and hugged them. Israel said to Joseph, I dared not accept the thought that I would see your face, and here God has shown me even your offspring. Isn't that beautiful? And yeah, that's one of those things. It's kind of like Zacharias wanting to see the Messiah being born before he passed, and prayed to God to see that. And that's just, isn't that amazing? That's just one of those things. And so Joseph then removed them from his knees and prostrated himself with his face toward the ground. Joseph took the two of them, Ephraim with his right hand and Israel's left, and Manasseh with his left and Israel's right, and he drew close to him. But Israel extended his right hand and laid it on Ephraim's head, though he was the younger, and his left hand on Manasseh's head. He maneuvered his hands, for Manasseh was the firstborn. He blessed Joseph, and he said, "Oh God." So you see what's happening here. He did this. He reached over and he touched Ephraim, and then he reached over and he touched Manasseh. And he's basically doing the whole thing of going back in history, and the firstborn isn't necessarily the firstborn.
Right.
Another one of these things that's like, whoa, what's happening here? And so some of the things that people do are baffling, but in the end, a lot of those things turn out to be for a reason, and for a good reason. So back to what Rabbi Sachs is talking about, he said Jacob's blessing of Ephraim and Manasseh is the only instance in the Torah of a grandparent blessing a grandchild. The only place. In all of the 5 books, you won't find it anywhere else. And between grandparents and grandchildren, there is no tension, but only pure love. You know how we love to spoil our grandkids. We love to spoil our grandkids. Now, then as we read along, as you were reading this week, you'll find that Jacob was blessing his 12 sons, and there is tension here in what's going on. When he starts doing his blessings, the blessings to his 3 oldest sons, they sound to Reuben, Simeon, and Levi, they sound more like curses than blessings. You remember, Reuben defiling his mother's bed, Simeon and Levi going and taking out a whole group of people after he circumcised them, the whole Shechem and all that deal. So they did some pretty rough stuff. And sometimes you end up paying for what you've done. And that's cause and reaction. That's just what it is. But Rabbi Sachs says that the very fact that he was blessing them all together in the same room at the same time, that's another thing that we had never seen before. Because when we look back at previous blessings, even when there were siblings that needed to be blessed, that it was never at the same time.
Right.
Esau and Jacob were blessed at different times. Ishmael and Isaac blessed at different times. So this sons, but they're known as the Israelites. They're a group of people. Now they're identified as a group, and they're still individual tribes, and we'll learn more about that next week. It's just, excuse me. So here's what's the amazing part about it is that, so when you look at this and you realize that there's tension in the room and everything that's going on, how did this family that has so much tension come together to be a people?
Right.
Let me propose this to you, that the tension is needed. There has to be family tension. There is no other way. If we all coddle each other and be agreeable and give in to each other all the time, we never learn and grow.
Yeah, that's good.
So it's important. So then we run into, later on here in this portion, Jacob dies, and then the brothers are worried again, because in that culture of that day, nobody would do anything to anybody as long as, in the presence of their father, so to speak. That would have brought even more tragedy, more upset to their father, and probably would have killed him instantly, And so Joseph wasn't going to and we know Joseph anyway, but they still had these doubts. Again, people fight with doubts all the time. But thankfully, that's one of the things that we do have a blessing of. We can read all of this and we can understand that we actually have a better understanding in some ways and shape and form, because we can look at the history and we can understand. We can look at the Bible and we can see that, yeah, bad does turn out to be good. I almost said good turns out to be bad. But Joseph says to them, you intended to harm me, but God intended it for good. For good. So what is the Torah telling us in all of this that we've learned over these, since the fall, when we started all this? What we have learned is that the family is prior to all else. You'll notice that in behind me is our dining room table. That's our family altar. That's where disagreements go to die. That's where tension melts away.
Yeah.
Does that mean that tension doesn't happen sitting around the table? It does.
Sure.
But it's a place where it can be taken care of.
That's right.
Where we sit together and we put aside us,
Ourselves.
and it's about everyone else at the table. Not long ago, that table, we've been in this apartment for a little while now, a little over a year, and it's a very small apartment. And when I saw the picture of this table, I immediately told my wife, get it. Somehow we just knew that this is where we're going to gather, and eventually we'll have some more people gathering around. And because at the altar where we sacrifice ourselves, so to speak, we put ourselves aside and we take care of others, that's where we begin to learn and grow and share with others and help others people come to an understanding of what Torah is really all about. I give you the Torah basic. Oftentimes Torah means instruction, and we are following God's instructions. So the family is prior to all else. It's prior to the land. It's prior to the nation. It's prior to politics. It's prior to economics. It's prior to the pursuit of power, which seems to be the first thing on many people's lists. Is if they can get a hold of the power, they can control others. And that's basically kind of what happens here now. So Joseph, through the leading of God, he is in the place of being the most powerful man in the world. And we learned about this, how he's the savior of the world. Everyone was starving. Everyone had to come to Egypt for food. He became the savior of the world. Another great illusion, another great picture of the Messiah. And so what you have happening here is that, in essence, here's something interesting. You may not have ever seen this, and I'm going to share it with you right now. Now, after the first couple of years during the famine, people continued to come, and they began to, they were coming to Egypt for the grain, and Joseph was selling them the grain. Well, then people began to run out of money, and they would have to sell possessions in order to be able to eat their grain. I know this sounds kind of like, wow, why is this happening? But Joseph, in his position, actually sets up the kingdom to be able to take control of the people. And this is how slavery ends up coming around. So again, Joseph ends up doing something. I'm understanding in his wisdom, he may realize what was going on, but he was also a part of the complete picture. Okay? Remember, these things happen to help bring about what God wants to happen. We don't always like the way they happen,
Right.
but it wasn't long before the people of Egypt had to sell their property. Now everything was government controlled. And when everything became government controlled, what happened? You see, not just the Hebrews, not just the Israelites, not just the Jewish people became enslaved, but the Egyptians as well. So everyone was in slavery. And so then as we go into the book of Exodus and we get to its culmination, we realize that I think it's like 2.4 million people. I'm just throwing numbers out right now, but it's quite a few are actually proselytes. A great many number of the mixed multitude that end up at Mount Sinai were Egyptians. They were from someplace else. Remember, everybody was an idolater in Egypt, even the children of Israel, the Israelites. Everybody assimilated. It ended up happening. Everybody became enslaved. And so it only stands to reason, yeah, there was Egyptians that wanted to get out of there too. They didn't have land and home. They maybe had a home, but everything was government provided. And so they wanted freedom. They wanted to have a place of their own, and they wanted to have a relationship with God. Again, this is part of the problem, again, of how certain things get messed up later on down the line. We always seem to blame some of the rabble and the problems on the mixed multitude that came in. But again, you have to remember something. God loves the proselyte. 36 times he talks about blessing them in the Torah, making sure that you take good care of the proselytes. And the proselytes, they're the exciting ones. They're happy to be following God.
Right.
Those that have been following God for a long time, they're like, will you please calm down? The Torah is going to be here. We study this stuff all the time. But I'm one of those guys. I'm one of those people like, hey, can we have another Torah study? Sure. Let's sit down and let's do it. And of course, we can relate this to our times now. We become so burdened down with the mundane of life, having to make ends meet. And without getting too political, when costs rise, it makes it even harder. You have to work harder to provide for your family, to feed your children and your grandchildren. And so then what ends up what's happening is more of your time is being taken away, time to be able to do what? To study Torah, to do what you want to do. These things are connected, folks.
Yes.
They're connected.
Secular.
And so what we realize here is, and we see it toward the end, what happens is, yes, Jacob dies, and they go up to bury him, and a whole entourage of Egyptians go up there. And in Genesis 50:11, it says that the people, the Canaanites, the people that saw this entourage, they saw these Egyptians coming, and they said, the Egyptians are holding a solemn ceremony of mourning. The people want to know what was going on. But that was looking at something from the outside and only seeing the external. So they didn't see exactly what was going on. This was a patriarch going back to Machpelah to be buried. This is a great thing. So then when we go to turn the page here next week and start in the book of Exodus, we discover just how vulnerable the people are, the Israelites are. And then so all of everything that Joseph had done, all of that centralizing and putting the power in the hands of Pharaoh, like I said, eventually that was used against them. So Genesis, everything that we've been reading, it's not about power, it's about family. It's about families coming together.
Yes.
It's because that's where life begins.
That's it.
In our world today, and especially here in the West, the attack on the family is huge.
Yes.
All you have to do is to go start looking at statistics, and you realize, 50% divorce rate, more and more people just living together and then not having children.
Yep.
that birth rate is going down, and it has been for years. We are putting ourselves into extinction.
Yes.
But I was watching Jordan Peterson right now, and the guy's not, Torah observant, but one of the things that he likes to say a lot, and because he's a psychologist, a psychiatrist, a psychoanalyst, is that you need someone else, and you need them in your life for all of your life. So you need a partner. Now I understand, when you start talking about things like this, again, the West has hurt the mind of the people, because yes, deep down, that's what everybody wants. They want a lifelong partner, someone that they can share with. And you got people that don't have that partner yet. And I feel for you. I do. And you struggle, but the West has made it so you attack something else because you don't have what you truly desire. But I'll guarantee you, I'll tell you right now, when you stop thinking of yourself,
Right.
and you start looking to help others,
Right.
that's when it'll happen. See, we live in a very narcissistic society. Everybody's always thinking of themselves. And so for right now, I want you to stop thinking of yourself and think about me for a while. I'm kidding. Okay, I'm kidding. But you understand. I put the challenge up to some people is, go do something for the next 21 days. Go do something for someone else.
Right.
Maybe something simple, help a little old lady cross the street. Hopefully it's not the one in the video where she doesn't want to cross the street and she ends up beating the guy with an umbrella, but go and help somebody. It'll help you.
That's right.
It'll take away the bitterness and the anger, and anger is akin to idolatry.
Yes.
I've talked about that many times. And so when we read the Torah, when we read the Bible, you have to look at it and you have to say, well, there's nothing easy about having a family.
Makes you feel.
So okay, so the point of the bringing up the family part of this is that yes, you may not have a partner right now, and hopefully you're not an orphan, but there are your other relatives.
Yeah.
And so when you want to help somebody do something for somebody else, choose your family first.
That's right. Right there.
Choose your family first, because I guarantee there is a member of your family that is struggling right now.
Right.
And you can help them.
That's right. Don't need accolades.
What is it? Is it something that you can do for them? You'll be able to figure it out. Trust me, you will.
Right.
So as I said, you can see that, but the family is where life begins. Now, I think I have a video somewhere on YouTube about man and man and woman, husband and wife. I think I get out the drawing board and I get into some Hebrew and some gematria and showing some things. It's a pretty good video. I should know I did it. The Torah. So the Torah does not imply that anything is easy about this, about having a family. So because right off the bat, when you look at the first three matriarchs, what were they? They're all barren. So, wow. And then especially Rachel, the testing of Jacob, who eventually become, the people of God. There was quite a bit of testing there. It just, and again, this is another one of those things I feel for people, because the agony of infertility has to be agonizing, for a loss of other words. I know people that they've been trying for years. I started a little bit late, so we'll go a little bit longer. My producer says how much time we have left. So they know what it is to wait and to wait again. Now, let me just skip ahead here a little bit. And one of the last things that Rabbi Sachs talks about was he says that he did some lectures. There was something that had started in 1967. They were called the Reith Lectures, and they were aired on BBC. Jonathan Sachs was, when he was alive, may his memory be for a blessing, he was the chief rabbi for all of Jewry in London, in Britain. And so he was invited to do lectures on the show. But before him, it was Bertrand Russell. And then there was a lecturer from Cambridge, a professor of anthropology named Edmund Leach. And Edmund Leach, he says, called his lectures a runaway world. So you're talking in 1967, things were starting to go bad. Well, they started to go bad before that. But and then we look at history in the West, and we understand prayer out of schools and all these things just started going crazy. Now, then you had Roe versus Wade, and just boom, yeah. And so one of the things that Rabbi Sachs says, that one thing that Leach said that made him sit up and take notice is that far from being the basis of the good society, the family, with its narrow privacy and tawdry secrets, is the source of all of our discontents. He says it was an important sign that the family was about to be dethroned in favor of sexual liberation and self-expression. Rarely has so important an institution been abandoned so thoroughly and so lightly. So you can see in that day, that's where everything started to fall apart. And that's where we are now. So many people just, and I said it before, just living together. So he gives some statistics. Right now, let's see here. Divorce rates, I think in Britain now is like 42%. Only 50%, and then 50% of children are born outside of marriage. So the family unit being dismembered and taken apart. And so you can see that the consequences have been devastating, and they've just been widespread all over the place. So, and he says here, the birth rate in Europe was far below replacement rate, a fertility rate of 2.1. The average number of children born per woman of the population is necessary for a stable population. No country in Europe has that rate. In Spain, Italy, Portugal, and Greece, it is down to 1.3. The overall average is 1.6. The only reason that we still have population growth in those countries in Europe and in the United States is because of immigration. And you know that we have a problem with immigration. Some people may deny that, but it's true. All right. People get upset about all that, but it's true. You cannot get away from truth.
We are becoming extinct.
So Rabbi Sachs says, meanwhile, in the United States, a significant part of the population is living in neighborhoods with few intact families, disadvantaged children, damaged neighborhoods, poor schools, few social facilities, and a desperate shortage of hope. This, for sections of America, is the end of the American dream. And he gets that from a book by Charles Murray about coming apart. And another one by Robert Putnam called Our Kids. It's important to know what's going on in your community around you. A lot of times, we look at these things and we think, oh, we just give up. What can I do? Well, you can start with your family. Now, I realize that I hadn't even gotten to the part about Shiloh. 49:10, I think it is. Let's just finish with that. Let's finish with that. But let's finish with that. The Rabbi Sachs, the last thing he says is, I believe that family is the birthplace of freedom. Caring for one another, we learn to care for the common good. You can do what needs to be done in your small little world. Remember me talking about we have our own little world? Yeah. Start with your family. 49 and 10. Jacob is blessing Judah. And he says, the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a scholar. This word scholar in the Hebrew is lawgiver. I want to point that out. From among his descendants until Shiloh shall arrive, and his will be an assemblage of nations. So this is talking about the Messiah being the king and having the scepter and bringing in the nations. And what does it say? He says he's going to be a scholar, a lawgiver. A lawgiver. Now, I won't get into the whole law-giving part, but that's for another time. When we get into the law, we get into the actual meat of the Torah later on, we can talk more about this. But it's interesting that this word Shiloh, it has to do with the Messiah, and there's many derivatives of the word, and this is wonderful about the Hebrew language, helping us to understand these things. And when I go into Rabbi Monk's book here, The Call of the Torah, let's see, 49:10. Stay with me, folks. 49:10. It's quite a bit of commentary. You know what? There's just so much content. 49:10. I should have had this marked before. Hold on a second. All right, so the scepter shall not depart. All right, the scepter shall not depart from Judah. Now, Rashi explains that it's from David onwards. And this is, but let's get to the scholar part, or the lawgiver, nor a scholar from among his descendants. In other words, disciples of Torah. So Shiloh arrives and they describe it here, this is King Messiah to whom belongs sovereignty. Now, Onkelos' translation reads it like this: the messianic faith is based on tradition. For Onkelos, the proselyte, a disciple of the Shemaiah and Avatalion, who lived in the time of the Second Temple, refers these words to the Messiah. This tradition has been carried on right to the present, and it cannot be rejected. For if we wanted to reject it, we could reject the whole religious faith and explain the verses in another manner. All is therefore based on tradition. There again is that reference to what has been talked about. They talked about it orally for years. Everyone, and again, if we did not have this oral transmission, which is now written down in the Talmud, Midrash, Mishnah, that we wouldn't have these discussions of these rabbis talking about and reading this portion of scripture and say, that's talking about King Messiah. It's talking about King Messiah. And it's tradition. And so many people want to throw out tradition until Shiloh arrives. This is the King Messiah to whom sovereignty belongs. Until his coming, Judah will hold the royal scepter in the midst of his nation. But the Messiah, son of David, will be king over all the gathered nations. His will be the assemblage of the nations, according to Rashi. So you see here, this is why they're called Jews, because Judah holds the scepter.
That's why we are called Jews.
In his Encyclopedia of Biblical Interpretation, M.M. Kasher quotes 11 different interpretations of the word Shiloh. But Jewish tradition has retained only that of Rashi and Onkelos, who give it the meaning of Messiah for the reasons mentioned by Rashi. Some Christian theologians state that without any solid foundation, that Shiloh is a name designating the founder of Christianity. Until the coming of Shiloh has, in a sense, become a favorite text for Christian missionaries. So, again, we have this little thing going on, and you have the Jewish people having their knee-jerk reaction to bringing about this meaning. But we have to understand that this word is broken down many times, and I'm looking for the right spot. Oh, that's because we have to continue reading. From Judah nor a scholar from his descendants until Shiloh arrives, and his will be an assemblage of nations. And verse number 11, he will tie his donkey to the vine. Now, to the vine branch his donkey's full. He will launder his garments in wine and his robe in the blood of grapes, red-eyed from wine and white-toothed from milk. So you see references of wine, which is blood, and I'm way over time. I understand this, and but basically, Shiloh is so the blessings. Let's see. They shall call peoples unto harmony, derived from Shiloh, from the root Shelah, and so it's going to bring about happiness and peace. So the scepter of Judah will no longer reign only over his own nation, but over the assemblage of the nations. And I could go on. I could go on with the donkey and the wine and all of that. There's so much, but we have to end. And so I'm truly grateful that you stayed with me for this long. Thank you for watching on a regular basis. Thank you so much for being with us and being a part of what we're trying to do here. And that's just we're just bringing Torah. We're just bringing we're bringing it to life. We're actually helping people to have a little bit of understanding. And my computer's acting real slow here. And so thank you so much. Remember to like and share. And the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Shabbat Shalom. Well, those of you that are still with us, I don't know how to stop the video.